Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Smith, and of course, I'm here with the Adams County Historical Society. I'm the historian here of the Society. Today's program is Gettysburg's Rock Creek. And I have done this particular program a number of times, but every time I do it, I add or subtract things from the show and make it slightly different. But today's version of the show will highlight the creek, east of the Gettysburg National Military Park. And I should mention a couple things about it. First of all, if you go to the battlefield, you probably noticed that there are creeks on both sides of the battlefield. Rock Creek on the eastern side of the battlefield and Marsh Creek on the western side of the battlefield. And the battlefield is kind of between these two creeks. Rock Creek is located in the south central portion of Adams County. And the creek starts about 7 miles north of Gettysburg, and it travels through the town due south from its headwaters. The headwaters are kind of just north of the Goldenville Road, if you know where that is, and it travels to the Maryland border. As the crow flies, it's about 13 miles that the creek travels through our county, but it takes 25 miles to get there because it meanders. Rock Creek starts at an elevation of 500 feet above sea level. And when the creek reaches Gettysburg, it is only dropped in elevation to 460 feet. So one thing's really important to understand about the creek is that the first section of the creek that runs towards Gettysburg is really slow moving water, and it doesn't fall at a rapid rate. But once it reaches the area around Culp's Hill at Gettysburg, it moves more quickly and it falls more rapidly. And at McAllister's Mill, the elevation is about 420 feet, and by the time it reaches the state border, it's fallen to 360 feet. So it's got a pretty good fall to it. Now, a little bit about the history of Rock Creek. Let me put that there for a minute. We have a survey of the Manor of Mask from 1765. And on this survey, they survey a large rectangular plot of land from our left, which is the border with Maryland. So on this map, west is to the top of the map. And it kind of runs northward from the Maryland border, about, I think, 43,500 square acres, something like that. And you might notice on the map that along the boundaries of the manor, they actually put farms and places on it. And you can see down here along the eastern edge of the Manor of Mask, an early survey for early settlers, you'll see a creek running. And if I turn it around and blow it up a little bit, you can see that it's called Rock Run. So this term comes from the 1760s. We had Rock Creek Associate Reformed Church, which was Alexander Dobbin's original church, and that dates from the 1760s. And here is a survey from Mount Joy Township, and you can see at the bottom, the survey was done in June 1755. And we turn it over, you can see that it says, down the several courses of Rock Creek. So Rock Creek and I think the CK and something else. But you get the idea. It is an early stream. And of course, to this day, I have found no written sources that explain to us why it's called Rock Creek. That's a joke. I don't know if you guys, I think it's one of those things that's kind of obvious and they don't have to write it down. So here's the Nicholas Skull map of 1770 I put on here. And you can see on this particular map, they show Rock Creek and Marsh Creek. And although this map predates the town of Gettysburg, which should be like right there, you can kind of get the idea of the battlefield being between these two creek systems. Willoughby's Run being a feeder of Marsh Creek, in case you didn't know that. Oh, I think I blew it up here. I didn't know I was going to do that. Okay. Here is our 1822 map of York and Adams counties. And on this map, you might notice, let's see, it's not, I didn't put it where it's labeled, but here it shows the whole creek. And on this map, I wanted to show the various feeders on it of Rock Creek. There's this big area of open land, and if you ride out the old Carlisle Road today, the Table Rock Road, it's the fields off to the right of that you really see the creek beginning. But you can see there's a bunch of fields that are drained into this creek. And remember I said that the feeder of it we consider on the Goldenville Road, that Wert's Tavern is that old greenhouse on Shriver's Corner Road and Good Intent Road. That intersection, if you know where that is, that's that house. And so you can see the stream coming down. Also, if you come down from, Shriver's Corner on the Harrisburg Road, you'll pass over a couple bridges where Rock Creek cuts under the Harrisburg Road at those locations. And that is also part of the feeders of the creek. And then on the next one, you can see the bottom part of that map where it feeds Rock Creek. And again, Rock Creek is shown on this where it feeds past Black's Mill, which is, I guess, and then it feeds this. I guess this is what do you call that? Barlow today. I was going to name the mill Horner's Mill. And then you can see it crosses into Maryland. If you've ever been down there, Marsh Creek joins Rock Creek, and then they flow into the Monocacy River. And where the confluence of those two streams meet is right on the Adams County line. It's really interesting. I think I was with John Fuss, one of our battlefield tour guides, and we went to the Mason-Dixon Farms, and then we went to the Mary Penn Bed and Breakfast, which is right on the Adams County, Frederick County line. And then we went to see one of the Mason-Dixon markers, and I talked John into walking a mile through the woods because I wanted to go to the confluence just so I could say I'd been there. So if you ever get a chance, it's out in the middle of nowhere and it's on private property. Okay. One other thing I wanted to point out on this 1822 map, you might notice there's a plum run in White Run. This is like Lake Heritage. And, there are 3 plum runs in Adams County on early maps, and none of them are the plum run that we think of on the battlefield. But plum run's a popular name for a run. And then also another feeder of, you see here, of Rock Creek is Rock Run. That is Plum Run. That is Plum Run that runs through the Gettysburg battlefield. But it's not called Plum Run on early maps. I tend to think that the name Plum Run was an accidental name given to that stream that had another name by Michael Jacobs, who's writing about the battle afterwards, because it appears on early maps by other names. But anyway, it's interesting to me because on surveys of land and early maps, the names of these streams are shown because they're landmarks. And you don't have that with a bunch of other features on these early maps. Now, of course, there was heavy fighting along Rock Creek on the first day's battlefield, just out here to our north, less than a mile from us. As a matter of fact, are we on this map? Oh yeah, we're right there. Actually, on this map, we're right there. But this is the part of Rock Creek that runs very slowly and drops very little. And you can see this area on the Warren map of the battlefield. This is the Harrisburg Road. So out here would be the Gettysburg High School. And, you know, if you spend time in the, with the Gettysburg High School, they have like a walking trail that goes along the creek that they use to jog on. It's really nice. And, you know, you're allowed to stop there and take a walk all along that creek. But again, it runs really, really slow. And sometimes it's imperceptible, the flow of the water, because it looks like it's just a pond. And this isn't part of that stream north of the Harrisburg Road. And you get an idea of how, you know, like pond-like it is. Here's another view from Rock Creek near the Harrisburg Road Bridge, looking towards Barlow's Knoll. That's the 153rd Pennsylvania Monument. Also, I might mention that we see Rock Creek in early views of the battlefield. Here's a view of, I think it's from like 1888, of the 17th Connecticut Monument on Barlow's Knoll. And Rock Creek is down here, and there's a covered bridge that crosses Rock Creek in this photograph. So I don't know if anybody thinks about what the crossings of these creeks were like at the time of the Civil War. Now, this covered bridge is kind of an odd covered bridge, and in early maps, and here it's kind of shown on the Batchelor isometrical map of 1863. So although it seems to have a roof on it, it's like an open covered bridge. And we don't have a real early image of it to determine what it looked like. But here's Barlow's Knoll up there. Here's the Harrisburg Road. Of course, you know, starting with the railroad, there was a railroad bridge that went across Rock Creek. And these are all kind of in close succession. There's the covered bridge, or the stone arch bridge that went across Rock Creek on the York Pike. You know what I need to do? I gotta get my my changer out, because I know my thing's gonna die in a minute. And there's also, if you look south of the Stone Arch Bridge on the Hanover Road, there's another covered bridge. So in quick succession along Rock Creek, east of Gettysburg, there were, let's see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 different bridges. Have you ever thought about that when you're out there? A couple photographs of them. Here is an image from the 1880s, and we are on the railroad bridge east of town. So Gettysburg be off to our right, and we're looking across the Route 30 Stone Arch Bridge, which was built early on. I think these bridges were put in, I'm guessing this one's about 1812. And this bridge, you're looking south towards big Culp's Hill in the distance. Here's a view from Benner's Hill. And this is 116, the Hanover Road. And we're looking towards the town of Gettysburg. You know, if you come back from Hanover, you go down the hill, around the turn, and over the bridge. And there was a covered bridge there, which is kind of fascinating. And then, of course, you know, right there is where there's a little marker for Ewell's headquarters. And you can see that this area wasn't developed yet. And you know, Culp Farm's over here. Also, Benner's Hill, there's a little farm lane off of Benner's Hill, and it leads over to the Christian Benner Farm. And this house still stands. Today it's known as the Redding property, and they pretty much own the property from the Hanover Road south along the eastern side of Rock Creek down towards, I think it ends somewhere before you get to Clap Saddle Road. So they own a pretty good amount of land there. I think it's no secret that, a lot of us would like this to be part of the battlefield. It's in private hands, and there's never been, the sellers do not seem interested in selling to the park. So, but it's a fascinating farmhouse. And I picked up this particular image at a flea market. And it took me a long time to figure out what farm this was. I know, I was a weird little kid. I'd always want to go to the flea market, and I'd be buying photographs of old farmhouses. So I have quite a good photograph collection. Yes, that's my original, Christian Benner. And of course, during the fighting, Johnson's division crossed the Benner farm on their way to Culp's Hill. Look at that. That's kind of weird looking, isn't it? That door there, a little log house and door. I think they must have, it looks like almost a broken stained glass window they put in there or something. So on July 2nd and 3rd, 1863, there was heavy fighting along Culp's Hill, north of the Baltimore Turnpike and south of the Hanover Road. And on July 2nd, 3 brigades of Edward Johnson's division attacked Culp's Hill, where they faced off against remnants of the 1st Army Corps and General George Sears Green's brigade of the 12th Army Corps. And, it was part of the second day's battle where the South attacked both ends of the line, and there was fierce fighting. And on July 3rd, the Confederate Army shifted more units into the fighting on Culp's Hill. The Northern Army shifted reinforcements into the area. And on the morning of July 3rd, the fighting on Culp's Hill erupted again. And it was ferocious fighting during the morning hours of July 3rd. Probably the longest continuous fighting of the battle took place on the morning of July 3rd along the slopes of Culp's Hill. And to get to Culp's Hill, Johnson's division had to cross a formidable, defense, Rock Creek. So the Union Army actually kind of used Rock Creek as part of this defense. And we have lots of articles in the paper that talk about the fact that today Rock Creek isn't anything as it appeared at the time of the battle. According to a 1908 article, the creek now is a pitiable caricature of what it was then. At that time, McAllister's Dam was unbroken. It was not then in the condition it has been for the last quarter of a century. High waters broke it, and it was never repaired or rebuilt. When the dam existed, the water backed up the whole length and breadth of the channel to beyond the bridges on the Harrisburg Road, a distance of 3 miles. And we have a bunch of articles that talk about this. And one of the interesting things about it is when it was deeper, there were points where the channel was narrow and the water was quite rapid. These channels connected good-sized bodies of water. At almost any point south of the Bonneville Road, the Hanover Road, it would have reached a man's waist. It will reach a man's knees, and at many points above a man's waist. And for an army to have waded was an undertaking worth mentioning. The creek was always bank full according to the formation of the banks yet to be seen. Banks which are yards away from the present stream. So for homework, I want you to go out to Rock Creek, and I want you to walk over and look, and you'll see, staying on the bank, that the creek today is some 3 feet or so below the top of the banks. And here's this account saying that when the mills were active, the banks, the creek was bank full. And there's some hard to grasp accounts by the soldiers. Colonel Silas Colgrove of the 27th Indiana said that the regiment was protected in front by a small creek, Rock Creek, some 60 to 80 feet in width and from 6 to 8 feet deep. Now, of course, he is near McAllister's Dam, so he's closer to where the water would be deeper, but that is hard for me to understand. Because today, you could cross almost anywhere along the creek, and the water would come up to your ankles. According to one article I like, again, this is from 1906. So people are complaining about the creek's, difference from that time to the battle, 100 years ago. If the ghosts of Johnson's men should arise and go wading again, they would be surprised, for they could do it now on dry land. And I remember years ago when I didn't understand any of this, Charlie Fennell showing me an account by a Confederate soldier who gets shot while crossing the creek and drowns in the creek. And of course, you're standing there like, you're not drowning in this creek. And then this leads to something else. So there is really no understanding today of the obstacle that Rock Creek was at that time, because the creek it's not full of water. It's just a meandering thing through some rocks. And the other thing is, and I have no explanation for this, but for some reason, the Gettysburg National Military Park does not interpret Rock Creek as part of the battle. Where can you go to see Rock Creek? We're driving on a couple miles from the town down to Spangler Spring, and Rock Creek is off to your left through the woods. There is no place to stop and walk over and see the creek. Why don't we interpret it? And there is one spot where, of course, there's no parking, but you can walk to it, and there's a mowed path that goes out to the 28th Pennsylvania Monument, which is out to the left. It's where they had a skirmish line on July 2nd. And if you walk past that, you can walk down to Rock Creek. I suggest parking at Spangler Spring, walking north up East Confederate Avenue, and then at the stone wall that you first come to, walk to the right, and there's a path, and you can easily walk back to Rock Creek that way. But why don't we interpret Rock Creek? So again, I guess my point here is that it is a formidable barrier that was crossed over in the Southern attack on July 2nd and 3rd, and we don't appreciate that enough today. Okay, so another thing that's interesting is in 1898, a new avenue was placed in the park, East Confederate Avenue, that went from the edge of the town towards the base of Culp's Hill and around Culp's Hill. But originally, from the time of the battle until 1898, to get to Culp's Hill from town, you would have to go out to the Culp farm and down the Culp farm lane. And then do you see how there's this little road that leads into the base of Culp's Hill? And it actually goes over to Rock Creek first. And it goes over to Rock Creek at a place known as Two Rocks. So I don't know when I was really first obsessed with, maybe I'll talk about that in a second, when I really got first obsessed with Rock Creek. But oftentimes, as a teenager or in my early 20s, I would just, have my tennis shoes on and some shorts, and I would walk in the middle of the creek all the way from like the Hanover Road to the Baltimore Turnpike. I think it's something we don't do enough, that we don't appreciate enough. Maybe we're afraid to get, leashes on us or something. But here's this article in the 1906 Gettysburg compiler, the famous Two Rocks. I have to say it like that. You can say it any way you like. To me, it's a dramatic place. The swimming hole of the Gettysburg Boys. And I never forget the first time I saw this article. I was a big fan of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And if you ever read his book, The Lost World, this sentence they have in here almost is right out of that the introduction to that book. Is there a man in town who has ever been a boy here? Or is there a boy in town who couldn't find two rocks with their eyes closed? It is in the long ago, the beaten path of the boys led down past the Reformed Church. Again, we're talking about the corner of East High Street and Stratton. Across Weinbrenner's Run, that would be, just as you're entering between the Culp Farm and the junior high school, then up the first hill along the fence, and then down over the next run and on past the third swamp to two rocks. Just beyond. And see, so I tried to find it. And there's actually another paragraph in that same article, and there's a much better description. So the boys of today have an easier route. He takes that avenue, East Confederate Avenue, at Middle Street, and midway between the second and third bridges, he hikes over a fence, and following the beaten path, he goes to okay, so I figured out where they must be talking about the second bridge is, and and so I was able to go over there. Now, I also was armed with a photograph of two rocks from the newspaper. Okay, on microfilm, it wasn't very good. And I went and got an original copy of the newspaper from the Historical Society, and I shot a photograph of it. So I had a better photograph. I guess some of my stuff is out of line here. So I went to try to find it. So I don't know when it hit me, but I realized that it must be down along that old road where that old road hits, the stream. And if I look at the Warren map of the battlefield, and you can see the Culp lane coming in here, they don't show the part of the lane that continued on in that photograph, that brings us down here somewhere. And to give you a couple key points, I thought I turned it. This is where Two Rocks ends up being. But this stone wall, where it turns, this is right where the avenue today comes around the hill. And this is right where Jones's brigade's brigade plaque is, if you know where that is. So you can find it. If you want to find it today, this is what I'm suggesting to you. You find Jones's brigade's plaque, and there's a stream that goes in. So if you walk right up past the stream, climb over the fence. Again, I think last week we told you to climb over a park fence. I don't think we're allowed to do that. But you climb over the fence and you go down towards the creek, and that's where Two Rocks is. And so I remember the day I was so excited. The Gettysburg compiler in the early 1900s would do like a yearbook, and it would send it out to the subscribers. So it was called the scrapbook. And in it, they would reproduce articles that had been in the newspaper in the past year, and they reproduced the Two Rocks article in this magazine with a much better, higher resolution image, even though it's still not good. And so using this image, I was able to find Two Rocks. And then, like last month, one of my friends, we have a postcard group on Facebook where we share postcards, and one of my friends put this image on of Two Rocks. I couldn't believe it. It's postmarked 1908. So probably from the 1906 article that was done about it, someone went down there, took a snapshot, made it into a postcard, and this was sent in 1908. So it's on, and if you're into that, you can get on our Facebook group, Gettysburg in Postcards. But my take on it is the Two Rocks are those two rocks. Just my take on it. And the kid in the earlier photograph jumping off of the rock was jumping off of this rock. So there's the two rocks along the creek. And there's lots of other rocks. There's more than two rocks, okay? You see this rock in the middle of the creek? I think that's in this view, that's this one right there. So this view is from, I'm standing on top of one of the two rocks. And it was raining that day. I went down there to shoot photographs for this program. The creek, I couldn't cross it because there was so much rain. Again, a lot of times you just cross the creek, But it was two rocks to this day has a good amount of water in it. And you can see how this was the swimming hole. So here in this image, I'm standing on one of the two rocks and we're looking south. And then here's an image from two rocks looking north. So, and you can kind of see the hill on the Culp farm over there. So the stream goes around and comes out to the Hanover Road, in case you wanted to see that. Another interesting thing about the Two Rocks article from 1906, it has this quote in it. Before the dam broke, the very small boys waded and washed in Pete Foot's ocean, pretending they were swimmers or swimming. They stirred up the mud until it was yellow crawling and la 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 la. Let's see. And then the leeches were a diversion at that point. I love that. And how a boy would, scream when he found that one of them was fastened to his body. Charlie Fennell had showed me an account where the 6th Army Corps arrives at Gettysburg and on the Baltimore Pike, and they all go swimming until a few of them jump out of the water screaming because they have leeches all over them. And, I was reading about this, and apparently at one time, all the creeks around here were filled with leeches. And I guess chemicals in the water or something happened. We don't have leeches in our creeks today, or at least like in great numbers. So, but apparently at one point, anywhere you go swimming, you're going to have a leech problem. Did you ever have a leech on you from the stream? I have. I think that's maybe not our creek here, or the creek where I grew up. So, I think that's something that you have to experience to understand what we're talking about. You just take a lighter and you put it next to it and it jumps off. It's not a big deal. Okay. So here's what's fascinating. I read that wrong when I was a kid. I thought it said Pete's Foot Ocean. I even read it like that one time to a group. And Gary said, Tim, that doesn't say Pete's Foot Ocean. That's Pete Foot's Ocean. And then I realized there's a black man in Gettysburg named Peter Foot. And he owned a cabin near the Hanover Road Bridge. And one of our members here, Ian Johnson, she owns a painting that she got, I guess, from her family that shows someone fishing and Pete Foot is selling him bait. And in the painting, this isn't the best version of it, it's the only version I have, but you can see his cabin out in the distance and Rock Creek down below them. So there's actually a painting, and apparently this painting was made in the 1840s. So I think it's from a Brinkerhoff family originally, if I remember. But isn't that fascinating? Yeah, so Pete Foot's Ocean is probably near the Hanover Road Bridge, and it's probably just because kids, it's easier for them to walk out to the bridge and swim there. But isn't that fascinating? Now, the other thing about this entrance to get to Culp's Hill, and this might be too complicated, but to talk about, but when we're trying to figure out where the photographs are called, the Harvest of Death are located, the Harvest of Death, one of the park rangers years ago suggested a location for the photographs on East Confederate Avenue. And it was near the base of Cemetery Hill. And I remember saying to him, how did they get their camera wagon out there? And he's like, well, they just came down this road. No, East Confederate Avenue was put in 1898. There was no access to that area until that avenue was put in. And I remember saying that, and I always wondered, there are photographs taken along Rock Creek. How do the people get to the area to take the photographs? Well, they came down the Culp farm lane and they came over this dirt road that emptied out right into the area of Two Rocks. And I don't know about you guys, but my first introduction to Rock Creek, again, because there's no interpretation by the National Park Service of Rock Creek, was William Frassinito, Gettysburg, A Journey in Time. And in his book, he highlights the Tysons of Gettysburg. C.J. Tyson recorded a series of stereo cards or stereo views of the battlefield in 1867. And ironically, or maybe not, 501 of his series, 501, it starts at 500, is the end of the Culp lane looking across that little stream that we showed you to the little knoll below Culp's Hill. So this is 501. And 502 is along Rock Creek. And I knew this. There's rocks in Rock Creek. And I knew this because, Bill Frassinito had a little map in his book, and he challenged you to go out and find these rocks. And I remember doing it. So if anybody gets his book, Journey in Time, his map is not that specific. So you park, on the East Confederate Avenue, and I think you had to park near Nichols Brigade plaque for the Louisiana Brigade. And then walk behind it and walk over to Rock Creek, and you try to find these rocks. And here's a good blow-up of that 502 from a really clear copy. And you can kind of see there's somebody sitting on a flat rock, and there was this rock in it. I remember when I went to find it. This rock you can find today, but this rock is easier to find. I called it the Rhino Rock. I have to have names for rocks. So I thought it kind of looked like a rhinoceros. So I just, when I go out there, just find that rock. And here's a variant of that view. And that's the same two rocks that are in that other view. I think it's this angle, this one, and that one. And Tyson would do this. He would take several views from different angles and list them with the same negative number. And we call them variants. So although C.J. Tyson recorded 501 to 580, within those 80 negative numbers, there's well over 100 views because he took multiple views, sometimes 3. So maybe there's 200 views of 80 views. But anyway, this is another 502 variant. And you can see that rock in the view. And again, I feel like I should go back out on a nice day and record better images for this particular show. But it was rainy that day, and I did just walk out and shoot an image. The rain made it kind of fuzzy. I needed a professional photographer with me. That's what I needed. And you can see there's my Rhino Rock view just for this. I did that last time I did the show. So I was hurriedly doing it in the morning. So here's 503, and it's Rock Creek looking towards McAllister's Dam. And I don't think I give you the all the moderns, though, but I've lined every one of these up. And here is 504. And these are all done within a short distance. If you haven't picked up in the show, I'm going from north to south. And because there were rocks in Rock Creek, and because he could get his camera down low and set up a foreground, maybe some weeds in the photograph, then he could have some middle ground and then get some background. 3D effect really works well in a creek, especially if you can get some reflection off of the water at the same time. Ooh. So the 3D effect is very, very good for things like a creek. And so they spent a lot of time, C.J. Tyson, and probably with William Tipton and Robert Myers, his crew, on Rock Creek getting these views. Now, when you take them out, you just cut down and use one half of them, put them in a book. Maybe they're not so exciting looking, but in 3D, it's really, really nice. And this one was just called Rock Creek. And here, this one, that's a one half of that view to give you an idea. And you can see the rocks in the background and how this one would not have been difficult to line up. And so you can imagine me when I was, I guess by the time I really started collecting stereo cards, I'm guessing I'm like in my early 20s, maybe 20, maybe 22. And so I have my stereo viewer and my stereo cards in my backpack, and I'm just walking down the creek with the original photographs. I never dropped one in the water, but, and putting them in the viewer and looking at them and finding the locations of them. It was a lot of fun. I think this one's 532, and it's basically just a big rock with some weeds growing out of it. I can't get grass to grow in my yard, but there's weeds growing out of a rock. And here's that view today. Again, I didn't get the exact angle, and it was really raining that day, so I didn't want to climb out into the creek. So you can see the cut in the rock that's the same. So I'm just a little bit off in my view there. But I would say, because we have views from Tyson, some from Weaver, some from Mumper, there might be like 30 1860s and 70s views along Rock Creek. Isn't that crazy? Along that 2-mile stretch. Also, do you know there was a guy named Leo Frankenstein? Not Victor Frankenstein, Leo Frankenstein. He was a landscape artist, and he came to Gettysburg and recorded images on the Gettysburg battlefield in 1867. And we have some watercolors that he did of Rock Creek. I have not tried to line this up. And here's another one. Rock Creek. It's really not, I like it. I don't know how much success I'd have at finding his painting positions. So we mentioned that Rock Creek, there's heavy fighting on Rock Creek, along Rock Creek on July 2nd and July 3rd. The Southern Army crossed that creek in their attacks against Culp's Hill. And I really like, and we have this downstairs in the museum, the John Batchelder isometrical map of the battlefield. And of course, it's not really to scale, but you can kind of see Rock Creek. And, in his explanation of the isometrical map, you were floating in a balloon about 2.5 miles east of Gettysburg. And you're floating right on the other side of Rock Creek, looking, from basically Spangler Spring up to the summit of Culp's Hill, which I think is fascinating. And of course, here he shows McAllister's Dam. And you can see how the water backs up on the dam and flows around to McAllister's Mill, as Rock Creek flows today. That dam is not there today, and so the water doesn't flow back into the mill race and down through McAllister's Mill today. It just continues on here at this point. But I think this is one of the best illustrations of the creek along that stretch. And because the dam was there, the water really backed up right here, especially when we talk about the area of Spangler Spring. And today there's a line of woods right here I'm going to talk about. Okay. This photograph I first learned of in a book, one of my favorite books on the battlefield, The Long Encampment by Jack McLaughlin. I don't know how long he lived here, but he was a resident of Cashtown for a time. And during the centennial of the battle in 1963, he wrote this book. And all the photographs in the book he got from Walt Lane, a local photographer, and including a collection of photographs he had from early on. And do you see that this is 502? This is a Tyson replacement of a Tipton variant. I love saying things that only like, two people will get. Yeah. Or understand. How about that? But nothing I love more to talk about the Tipton replacements of Tyson views. It's one of my favorite topics. But early on, I showed Gary this, and, I don't have, I'll have to get on Gary. I don't have a modern view of this, but Gary and I found that rock, and we have a view of us sitting on the rock. Gary had to set his timer and then run over to the rock and jump up. So I'd love to show you that view, but Gary hasn't given me access to it yet. He's got it, I'm sure, somewhere deep in his collection. But trust me, that's halfway between the other views I just showed in Two Rocks and down towards McAllister's Mill along the creek. And there's some sizable rocks in the middle of that creek, I got to tell you. Now, when we get down towards the area of, near Spangler's Meadow, which in this view would be off to our right, you can see that the bend of the creek. Actually, no, we're looking, in this view, we're looking north, but off to our left would be Spangler's Meadow. And you can kind of see the lilies and the creek. And this water, it's kind of at a low ebb when these images are taken. One thing I started to notice is here, like on eBay, there was a variant of that for sale. And I just shot it, just stole it off the page. But can you see how that's a slight variation? That's not the same exact view. I guess I could point to something that you could see that's a little bit, but it's a little variant. And, oftentimes I think I've seen all the Tyson Brothers series from 1867. Often there's a slight variant that comes available. Maybe it's not that exciting, but there are variants out there. So here is Spangler Spring would be here. And today, if you come up Cold Grove Avenue, you're basically coming up and around here. If you go down Carmen Avenue, around here, and right about there would be the Second Massachusetts Monument, or Second Massachusetts and 19th, is it not 19th Indiana, 20th Indiana, 27th. Wow, you can tell I haven't guided in a while, right? 27th Indiana, and then Cold Grove's Regiment, and then you come across here in Spangler Springs right there. And you can see the stone wall here. You'll see remnants of that stone wall today. But do you see how there's trees on the Warren map along Rock Creek? And I don't know if the Civil War, the visible evidence bears that out. And on the Park Commission map, which they did like in 1900, you can see that they put a little fence up and they planted trees along the creek there at that location. And again, we're talking about, there's the monument, I guess to the Second Mass and the Second Mass. Oh, the road, they're showing it over here. And 27th Indiana right there. But, and there's Spangler Spring. But I don't know if I agree with this. I don't know if the photographs bear that out. That stone wall where Smith's Brigade plaque and maybe where part of Smith's Brigade lined up on the morning of July 3rd, that would be right over there. Here is a map from the official reports that shows the movement. Actually, this particular map is from the regimental history of the 27th Indiana. And you see, they don't show any trees along the creek at that point. I think there are honest debates that we have when we talk about features on the battlefield and what they look like at the time. It's the 2nd Massachusetts and 27th Indiana charged across that field on the morning of the third day of the battle, lost about 60% of their men, and part of it, the loss was because of Smith's Brigade firing into their flank. And this is an 1890s view from the wall where Smith's Brigade supposedly advanced to, the 27th Indiana Monument, the 2nd Massachusetts Monument, and you can see how open it is all the way to Powers Hill. And you probably realize that it was just 10 years ago that the park cleared these trees, because this is what it was like, when I was young. That's what it looked like. And of course, to be honest, I guess it's looking like that again today. But they had cleared it. I think it's cool in this photograph. Do you see this rock here? You can still see that right there. And this is where the East Confederate Avenue comes through. But that's kind of an interesting view. And so you might know that on the third day of the battle, Union artillery on Powers Hill was pummeling the flank of the Southern Army as they were charging up the slopes of Culp's Hill. And one of the really interesting things I point out in my farms book is Rufus Culp is with the Signal Corps at Powers Hill, and he's directing artillery fire into the Culp farm during the battle. So hopefully he avoided his parents' house. Here is a view from that Tyson series, C.J. Tyson, 527. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. 527. And we're actually in Spangler's Meadow with our back to Spangler Spring, and we're near Rock Creek, and we're looking over to the Tawney Farm. The Tawney Farm is on the east bank of Rock Creek, across from Spangler's Meadow. And you can see the caption actually says, view on Rock Creek near McAllister's Dam, not too far away. And we're looking across these two people that are fishing. I find that interesting. Can you imagine fishing in Rock Creek? You'd have to pick a spot that's above your ankles, first of all. But John Burns, when he gives a tour of the battlefield to John Trowbridge in 1869, I have the account of the tour. Maybe it's 1867. It's in my John Burns book. They go to Culp's Hill and they stop at Rock Creek. And John Burns tells them that good fishing here, it's great for eels. I picture John Burns eating eels. Yeah. I don't know about you. I grew up fishing, and eels were not something I enjoyed. I guess you smoke them. It's like mackerel or something. So here's another version of it. And that house was there at the time of the battle. Charles Zephaniah Tawney. And he was actually in Company K, 1st Pennsylvania Reserves, the local company that actually served in the Army from Gettysburg. And he was injured at the Battle of Charles City Crossroads. I think, if I remember correctly, he fell down and a wagon wheel rolled over top of him. So he was injured. He returned home. So he's here at the time of the battle. And there's an article that mentions that he's on Powers Hill during the fighting. So he fled his house, but he's up there on Powers Hill at the signal station, probably with Culp. Probably just saying, yeah, could you direct the artillery fire a little bit farther to the left there? And of course, his house was damaged by artillery fire during the battle. But isn't that just a great image? And so if you want to see the Charles Zephaniah Tawney farm no longer stands. Here's another view of it, again from the, we're looking east from Spangler's Meadow across Rock Creek. Remember I showed you on one map that they put that fence in and they put trees behind it? And we're looking across the creek. Look how open it was at that time. And that is a stone house that's no longer there. And here is an 1879 image. So this is after the Second Massachusetts Monument is erected. Do you remember that is the first monument to a regiment placed on the battlefield, marking the spot where that regiment was during the battle? Try to qualify it somewhat. It's the first real regimental monument. And I think the 27th Indiana Monument today is on that rock right there. They cut the top of it off, and it sits on top of that rock. So it's not there yet. But look behind William D. Holdsworth's head. Do you see the Charles Zephaniah Tawney farm? And boy, was I excited to get this image. I got this when I was a kid. It's in one of those pamphlets, those photographic pamphlet booklets that came out around the turn of the century. And this is by, I forget which pamphlet that comes from, one of those companies like in Maine, Chisholm or something like that. And it's a close-up of the Tawney house. And today, that house is no longer standing. But again, for homework, I want you to find the foundation of that house. And there are rarely any snakes around it. I'll give you a hint to how you can find it if you want. Look at that big rock. Look at that big rock in the front yard. Oh, I couldn't find it there. Yeah, right there. But you can find the hole for the barn and the hole for the house are still there, okay? It's a big hole. And I forget what account it was, but in one account I read, or it could be an old tour guide story, that Wesley Culp's body is buried in the foundation of the Tawney house. Have you ever heard that? I think that's definitely a tour guide story. But hey, that didn't stop me from digging in the cellar. Do you know who owned that property and who bought it and then gave it to the park? The GPPA, the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Association, purchased the land, and I was on that group, so it was all right that I was digging in the basement. And then we turned it over to the park after the boundary study. So I was, I spent a lot of time on that particular property. So, and I was going to say, we have a couple maps from the official reports that show, I mentioned Colgrove's account, especially where the 13th New Jersey monument is. There were skirmishers firing across the creek at the Tawney house, and Confederate sharpshooters had taken possession of the Tawney house, and there was a sharpshooter battle across the creek. And the creek made a natural barrier as a defense of the flank of the Union Army during the battle. And here's another, drawing from the official reports. And you can see, look, stone house occupied by rebel sharpshooters. So how cool is that? And I forget which account has it, but there are several Confederates killed around that house. Theoretically, they're still buried around it. But, and then, of course, on the third day, you probably know that Thomas Neal's brigade is brought off the Baltimore Pike, and they're sent over onto the eastern side of Rock Creek, and they occupy that area today that we call Neal Avenue. And then they're involved in the protection of the flank against these rebel sharpshooters. They're occupying that particular area. So for whatever reason, the Tysons maybe understood a little more about the battle, or just because the scenic nature of the creek took a lot of images right in that area. So in this view, we're standing again at the edge of Spangler's Meadow, if we want to call it that, and we're looking south, and the 13th New Jersey's position would be on the bank in the woods here above these rocks, and the stone Tawney house would be just over here to our left. And so we're looking downstream. Do you see in this image how because of the dam, obviously, the water is bank full at that location. And again, you can learn all about this if you just go to the Spangler Spring and then walk up East Confederate Avenue and along that stone wall to the creek. And then you're right near this location. And you can walk down the hill into the creek if you want to. But again, I want you to notice that the bank, it's a drop of several feet when you go down into the creek. And then you can just look to your right and you'll have this view, or what's left of it today. Not that far. I would say less than 100. I couldn't throw a football there. I always think about how many yards thing is. Could I throw a football that far? So no. So I'm going to guess it's like 80 yards. Somebody might be able to throw that far, but not me. And you're uphill, too. You're throwing uphill. So there's a close-up of that from there, from my best version of that. And then here is a beautiful albumin print I got of the same rocks. Can you see that? Now, you might have, in this next one, this big rock is covered with a whole bunch of weeds. Can you see it there, covered with the weeds? But that's those same rocks. And I really wanted to find those rocks. And, of course, I don't have it in the slideshow, I don't think, but I did get a view of me sitting on that rock. Here's another view of the same rocks. The big one that I just talked about is off to the left. And then we're looking, and you can see there's Spangler's Meadow, like I'm talking about, up towards that stone wall. This is an 1898 view on Rock Creek. We had the original negative for that view. Here's an 1867 stereo view of, again, from the Tyson. This is actually from C.J. Tyson. Tipton and Myers just later took over from him, and I have some of the views with that number on them. But 530, and it's a guy sitting on a rock, and sure enough, I found this location, and the 13th New Jersey monument is on the hill just behind them. So when you ride in a car onto Culp Hill on the Coal Grove Avenue, and then you go around to the right on Carmen Avenue, named after the colonel of the 13th New Jersey. As you go around the bend, I want you to stop your car in the middle of the road and get out. Block traffic for a while. And then just walk to the edge of the road and look down, and you're on top of those rocks, and you can look down and see Rock Creek. This works especially well in the winter, this time of year, where there's no underbrush and tree limbs between you and the creek. You can really get this whole idea of this part of the creek I'm talking about. Okay? Yeah, tour guides hate it when people block the road and get out. Happens to us all the time. But isn't that neat? That's probably, I think that there might be William Tipton. He's got fuzzy short hair at that time. Okay. And then I love this view. Here are swimmers in Rock Creek. I think I realized at some point, I don't know how long it took me to realize it, that this guy is standing on a rock. There's a big flat rock there. And I located this view. This one took me a while. I remember that I had it in my mind that I like to name rocks. That was the Whale Rock. See the whale? And I looked and looked and looked for that hill, or that rock. And it even says McAllister's Dam, Wolf Hill in background. So I knew we were looking across the creek to Wolf's Hill. But you know how I ended up finding this view in the end? That rock. I found that rock along the side of the creek, and then it all fell into place. But look how deep it is. And I even had a colorized version of this view. Ooh, isn't that cool? And this is a hand-colorized stereo card from C.J. Tyson's series. So he was able to go out there. I wonder how many days they spent with a darkroom wagon in the summer of 1867, fighting off the snakes and eels along Rock Creek to get these images for us to enjoy today. I'm just amazed by it. This is also another view taken from near that same exact location, looking across the creek up to the side of Wolf's Hill. And again, I wish in one of these views they would have captured the Tawny House in the background. But in both of these views, the Tawny House is just too far off to the left to capture. And then again, here's this section of the creek from the John Batchelder isometrical map. And you can kind of see where the creek comes down and turns. Oh, wrong thing. That went dead. But there, again, is the dam. Now, here I'm going to show you the rest of this map going south. And confusing matters, well, there's a mill. confusing matters is there's another dam farther downstream, and that really flipped me out for a while. But here's McAllister's Mill, the stone mill and the house and the barn. And this would be the, is that called, what is it called? McAllister Creek Road? It's anyway, this road today dead ends, but it's the one that goes in at Mulligan McDuffer. Here it is on the Warren map, the McAllister. So at the bottom here, we're at Mulligan McDuffer. And it's private property, but I mentioned it either last week or 2 weeks ago. I mentioned in this program that HGAC gives tours in the spring and summer on Saturdays, I believe at 1 o'clock. And you just give a donation to the person giving the tour, and they walk over McAllister's Mill Road and down to the site of the mill, and you get a tour of it. I took the Historical Society members on a tour of the mill. I don't know how many people went on that tour. Anybody here go on that tour? A few. Okay. It was really neat. Now the mill's not there anymore, the stone mill along the creek. But, I went to the foundation of the house and the mill. I didn't go to the barn. But you can see how it worked. They put a large dam across the creek, and then the water flowed around into a mill race that fed the mill. And it took us a long time, but I kept looking for photographs of McAllister's Dam, and I kept not finding it. And it's because there was another dam closer to the Baltimore Pike Bridge. It was for a sawmill. And there was a bunch of photographs of that dam. And every one of them was listed McAllister's Dam. But for me, I always had thought that a mill must be like upstream from the mill, not downstream from the mill. And I was always confused by that. I can never line up any of the photographs. But finally, Gary and I found a photograph of the dam. Now, according to the accounts, the dam had bursted in a flood right after the battle. And so in these 1867 photographs, this is Peter Weaver's image, a stereo, the dam's already burst. And by the 1870s, the dam's gone. So the views we're seeing of Rock Creek in 1867, it's still not as much water as there would have been at the time of the battle. So just to show you, Gary took my photograph at the same location. I'm playing, near the same location. See the rock on the left, bottom left? You can kind of see. You see here, I just show you that I'm in the right place. You see that X there? You can still see that X in the rock there. See it right there. So Samuel Weaver, of course, has that big, gigantic white beard, and I am never going to have a beard like that. I refuse. But there I am at the creek. And of course, the stream fills the mill race that feeds McAllister's Dam, or I'm saying McAllister's Mill. And we have a lot of photographs of McAllister's Mill. But the mill was sold in like 1915, and by 1917 they had removed all the stones of the mill. Of course, today McAllister's Mill is important to us because of the Underground Railroad. It's one of the best documented Underground Railroad sites in our area. And boy, we would love to buy that and, preserve it. The guy who owns it lives in Hanover, really nice guy, and he gives us permission to go out onto it. And I feel that, one day he probably will, sell it. It'd be nice to have like a Underground Railroad tour and presence that is associated with our national park. And of course, there's heavy fighting around McAllister's Mill during the battle. On McAllister's Hill, off the Baltimore Pike, just to the right or south of Mulligan McDuffer, Weininger's battery had an artillery section firing into the Confederates crossing Rock Creek. And again, I've been collecting photographs of McAllister's Mill for a long time, so I have a good amount of them. And, you know, McAllister's Mill appears as Samuel Gaddis's Mill on that 1769 survey. On the 1769 survey. And you might know that there is a crossing of the creek at McAllister's Mill. Here's a 1890s view of it. Oh, come on. You're not catching any fish in that. I think that's just for show, don't you? But here you drove across the creek. You know, probably one of the biggest, I don't want to call it a mistake, oversights in the park has been not building a bridge at that location. How come we didn't build a bridge there? That's a public road. I mean, the park built other bridges on other public roads to make it easier to access parts of the battlefield. But this road, which of course you go into from Mulligan McDuffer, and it ends at Rock Creek, or it dead ends before that now, and then you cross it, and then that goes up to Culp Saddle Road, you know, Mount Joy Township. The other issue with it, I can tell you this, and this is common. It's between two townships, Mount Joy and Cumberland, and neither one really wanted to spend the money, I don't think. So no bridge was ever built there. And because of that, both sides of the road that led to the bridge have kind of been vacated. And now Neal Avenue, which is up over across the bridge and up to the right, has become landlocked because a bridge was never built at that location. If a bridge had been put in by the Gettysburg National Military Park in the 1890s, we wouldn't be having this problem. We'd be driving cars up that road. So, but this is what it looks like today. So you can go down there and you can check it out. And I do suggest if you want to cross, you can cross there. It's easy to cross there. You can climb on the rocks or just roll up your, take off your shoes and socks and roll up your pants and walk across. It's not that deep. Here's a view from the Culp Saddle Road on the east side, looking back towards McAllister's Mill. And one thing I want to draw your attention to, I don't know how well you can see it here, is over here. There, you see this log? There is a log bridge with hand ropes at the time, maybe prior to the battle. And that's how people got across the creek at that location. So if you're asking me, I'm thinking that before they put the bridge over the Baltimore Pike, and that road was laid out in 1769, you came up from the south to Rock Creek, and then at the base of Wolf's Hill, you turned right and you drove, and this road is still there, this little road, and it goes all the way to McAllister's Mill. Then you crossed the stream at that location, splashing through the water, and then you went back up McAllister's Mill Road and came back out to the Baltimore Pike. And that's how you avoided, crossing that deep gully where the Baltimore Pike Bridge is, until they built a nice solid bridge over the Baltimore Pike. But if you're walking, you're not splashing through the water, so you use the very safe, very stable log with the hand ropes, right? And I have a lot of photographs that show people at McAllister's Mill Dam, or McAllister's Mill Ford, let's call it, crossing on that footbridge. And you can actually go out there. I've actually lined this up, and you go in the middle, and you can find metal rods still sticking up out of the rocks that they nailed down through to hold that bridge in. Isn't that wild? Okay, so put that on your list. McAllister's Mill, find the metal rod sticking out of the rock. Find the location of the bridge. And actually, near McAllister's Mill, if you're standing with the foundation of the mill to your back, if you walk down to the right, there are 2 or 3 rocks you climb up onto, and you can see where the bridge starts to go across. You can actually, it's really evident there. Okay. And as we get closer to the Baltimore Pike, we have this nice bumper photograph of the Baker Farm, which is where Dean Schultz now lives. So we're coming out again, and we're getting closer to the creek. And then I wanted to show you from the isometrical map that we've been talking about, John Batchelder's 1863 isometrical map. You can see the Baltimore Pike Bridge, which is quite a bridge. And you can see the sawmill. And then here, you can kind of see the sawmill dam. Do you see how they put a dam? And then there's a mill race that comes out that feeds the sawmill. And on the 1916 Gettysburg National Military Park Commission map, you can actually, maybe it's 1914, you can actually see the sawmill, and you can see the dam there blocking the water and how it came around to the mill. Isn't that wild? And here we have lots of photographs of the sawmill dam along Rock Creek. And that particular view was turned into a William Tipton postcard. And of course, what's the postcard called? McAllister's Dam. You know, I wish I could go back and explain to you the frustration I had not being able to locate the mill dam because I was looking in the wrong place with the wrong photographs of the wrong dam. But, you know, it's one of those things, you know, I enjoy all that. But there's lots of rocks in the creek in the photographs, so, you know, I was going to find it. And I remember figuring out where it is one day. And I figured it out because I just started walking the creek and looking for that rock. That rock had a funny looking lean to the side and had a funny looking face on it. So there it is there. And look how, when you stand there, if I was to stand like right there in the water, that thing is over 6 feet high. So that's a pretty elaborate dam that held back the water for the sawmill race. Now, none of that is there today. None of that. That's all gone. But again, if you look back at some of these, look how extensive that thing was that went across the creek. That must have been really a great photograph. You like that photograph? And one more thing I wanted to point out is there are things I don't know, things that sometimes I don't tell people, these little secrets I have, because I'm hoping to find the answer and then reveal them at some point, you know, although I'm sure nobody's waiting for my dramatic reveal posts like I think they are. But there's this balancing rock that appears in photographs. And I found one article recently that it's near McAllister's Dam or McAllister's Mill. And it's supposedly on Wolf's Hill, across a creek from McAllister's Hill, or McAllister's Dam. And it's a rock that's perfectly balanced on the rock below it. And maybe it even said to sway in the wind. And according to the article in the paper, that's what it says. And then here's another angle of the same boulder on the rock. But I got to tell you, I cannot find that rock. I'm convinced it fell over. And so, you know, I haven't really gone back out. It was a while before I gave up. But I think I got to reassess what I'm looking for and try to find that rock below it with something laying beside it, because I'm not finding it. But, you know, well, I think that's it I have for today. So thanks for coming to the program and learning just a little bit more about Rock Creek. And again, I would suggest for homework, you can ride down the Baltimore Pike after, of course, you get something to eat, a hearty lunch. And then if you go on Colgrove Avenue and go around Carmen, then you look down and see the creek and then park at Spangler Spring and just walk over to that section of the creek and walk along there, and it'll tell you a lot more about the obstacle that really was during the battle